This is me preparing to play in the biggest Pokemon card tournament ever. I'm going to be competing against almost 2,000 players at NAIC in Columbus, Ohio. Ever since I got top 4 at the World Championships last season, I haven't been doing as well as I'd like. I wanted to prove myself, and there's no better way to do it than competing in the most difficult tournament I can. When playing in a Pokemon tournament, your preparation defines how well you do, and is arguably more important than how you play in the tournament. That's because of the deck building phase, which has 2 separate parts: the type of deck you play and how you play it. Every deck has a main strategy that the entire deck focuses around, but also small decisions to be made of which exact cards to play within that strategy. Fortunately for me, choosing what type of deck to play for this tournament was actually very easy. I wanted to play the strongest deck I could find, which I quickly realized was Gardevoir EX. Gardevoir EX has one of the best abilities ever, allowing you to attach as many energy from your discard to your Pokemon whenever you like with only a small cost. It can do massive damage with Zacian V and the baby version of Gardevoir, which lets you deal with high health multi-prize Pokemon. It can also deal with 1 prize threats with Cresselia and using Gardevoir EX itself 2 tank hits. With it decided I would play Gardevoir EX, I had to do the hard part, deciding exactly what to play it with. This was going to be so difficult because NAIC was going to be played in a completely new format than any major tournament before it, as the new Paldea Evolve set had just released a few weeks before, adding over 100 cards to the pool of possible cards I could play. This meant that I had no true precedent to base my deck off of. I initially decided the best thing to do was copy the best deck list I could find from Japan. Japan got the set slightly earlier, so I could decide what was good in the format before the Western release date. I made some small changes like getting rid of Temple of Sinnoh and replacing it with Collapse Stadium, and spent the entire week practicing with this deck. But I knew if I really wanted to do well, I would have to innovate. If I just played a deck list that all nearly 2,000 players knew about, there wasn't a great chance I would do well in the tournament. I needed a differentiating factor, and as I left for America, I hadn't worked it out, but I actually had one stop first. There was a relatively small tournament happening in Puerto Rico a week before NAIC, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to get some practice in an in-person setting. Unfortunately for me, I started the day with a loss and a tie, meaning even though I won all 5 of my remaining rounds, my tiebreaker wasn't good enough to get me into the top 8 players, even though I had the exact same record. I missed the top cut, ending up 9th out of 127 players, but I had a lot to take away from this. My loss was against Dialga Magnezone, which is a pretty bad deck that has seen almost no tournament play. I should have been able to beat it easily, but I couldn't exactly work out what improvement could be made to make sure a loss like that wouldn't happen again, until I made my way from Puerto Rico to Ohio. When I arrived at my hotel ready to practice with my group, Brent told me an idea he had. Brent is one of the best players in the game and is known for his genius deck building. His idea was, instead of running reversal energy and higher quantities of the consistency cards that are only good on turn 2, we should instead run 2 Zacian, 4 Sealstone, more Psychic Energy and more Fog Crystal. The idea being that it would be more likely we would be able to reach high numbers of Psychic Energy in the discard to hit Hybridization or Shining Arcana Gardevoir earlier in the game, and we had more Fog Crystal to ensure our turn 1 setup was as good as possible. This was the solution to the issues I had with Dialga Magnezone in Puerto Rico. If I could have got 8 Psychic Energy into the discard earlier, then I would have easily handled their big threats. Initially, I was incredibly skeptical on some of the counts. I just played 3 researching my deck list to Puerto Rico, and this one had 0. But I trusted Brent's methods, and after days of back and forth between possible slight changes, I decided to play an almost identical list to what Brent proposed to me earlier in the week, changing only the second Forest Sealstone to be a copy of Research. And that brings us to the tournament. Round 1 had me against Mew VMAX, a matchup I had already determined would have me at a disadvantage, but I thought I still had a good chance. I went first and set up. He was able to knock out my Mew on the first turn using Meloetta and Fusion Strike Energy. I found the response to his Meloetta with Rare Candy allowing me to evolve my Ralts straight into Gardevoir EX, putting me far ahead in the game, as his strategy revolves around taking a prize lead in the early turns, and on the second turn we were already tied in prizes. He was able to knock out my Gardevoir EX with Mew VMAX, but I was already far too well set up to lose. I found Zacian with 9 Psychic Energy attached to one-shot his Mew VMAX, taking 3 prize cards, putting me at 2 prize cards remaining. And while he knocked out my Zacian V, a simple boss's orders, which allows me to bring up any Pokemon on his bench, allowed me to knock out his weak Genesect V, drawing me 2 prizes and winning the game. But Pokemon series are played in best 2 out of 3. I'd won the first game, but I still had to win one of the next 2 games in order to get the series win. In game 2 I had a slow setup, and his Mew VMAX was able to knock out my Mew and my Curlier before I was ready to attack. And he also put Path to the Peak in play, which shuts off my reigning Greninja and Gardevoir EX, putting me in a tough spot early on. This turn was my last chance to get an attack off to still have a reasonable chance of winning, and while it was slightly unlikely, I thought it was better off going for it than giving the game up. With my opponent at 4 prize cards remaining, I had to knock out his Mew VMAX on this turn, or I'd be too far behind to win. I found Worker to bump the Path to the Peak, and got all the Curliers I could to discard all the energy, which alongside Ultra Ball discarding 2 energy put me exactly 9 energy in the discard, allowing me to knock out his Mew, but the game was far from over. He went for Psychic Lead with his Mew, which allows him to shuffle the 3 prize card liability into the deck, leaving me with no chance to win that turn. Now I had to go on the defensive, as if he was able to find all his power tablets, which increases his damage by 30, and boss on my Gardevoir EX, I would lose. I played Iono, collapsed Stadium which limited his bench, trying to prevent his draw with Genesect V's ability, and knocked out the Genesect he promoted, praying that he couldn't knock out my bench Gardevoir EX. After a long turn of drawing as many cards as he could, he wasn't able to find the knockout, and my Zacian V in hand was able to take the last remaining prize card, winning the series with a 2-0 score. This put my tournament record at 1 win and 0 losses out of the 6 wins I needed to advance to the next phase. In round 2 I was playing against Gardevoir EX, the same deck as me, although his list was far different from mine with 2 copies of Reversal Energy to my 0. Fortunately for me, I was able to go first and find a knockout with Gardevoir EX on his new celebrations on the second turn, while he wasn't able to find a rare candy to attack on his second turn. In this matchup, if you fall 2 prizes behind, it's almost always as good as over, and at this point in the game that was exactly what had happened. So while my opponent played out the rest of the game trying to break through my setup with Cresselia, he never had a good opportunity to come back, and when he realized he was running out of time, he conceded, giving me the game 1 win. This is because of the time rules in Pokemon. Series are capped at 50 minutes plus 3 additional turns, and Pokemon games can go as long as 30 to 40 minutes in some instances. This game had gone 30 minutes, so my opponent realized they had to start the next game as soon as possible if they wanted to end the series tied at a game each. In game 2 he missed an attack on his second turn. I had the opportunity to attack first with my Cresselia, and he actually gave me the win, as he didn't have nearly enough time and was already behind. This put me at 2 wins and 0 losses in the tournament, which was a good start, but it was about to get much more difficult. Round 3 would be against Lost Zone, which is a bad matchup, but I was relatively confident regardless. In the first game I had my Manaphy in the prizes, which is crucial to the matchup as its ability prevents my opponent from using Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken to take knockouts on my bench Pokemon. I was starting the game behind, so if I wanted to win I had to act fast, and I had the perfect starter, the Zacian V. I was able to set up my board, attach an energy for my turn to my Zacian V, and use Zacian's Roar of the Sword to attach another energy, which meant I had a guaranteed attack on turn 2 even if I missed Rare Candy and Gardevoir. He had a lackluster turn, missing his attack with Cramorant, which can attack for free on turn 1, usually a menace in this matchup, but he simply couldn't find the cards. I set up 2 Curlier and attacked with Zacian, but this was his opportunity to cripple my setup with Radiant Greninja. He found the Mirage Gate to power up the Greninja, and was able to knock out both of my Curlier. I tried to get back in the game, but every Curlier I set up was knocked out by Sableye, and I wasn't even able to find Iono to give myself a chance to come back at the end of the game. I lost game 1. In the second game I started Zacian again going first, but I had an incredibly slow setup, and this time he was able to hit his Cramorant attack. I went with the same strategy as the first game, attacking with Zacian and setting up my Curlier behind it. But he did something unusual. He had an attack with Sableye, but instead of knocking out my Curlier, he decided to knock out my Manaphy, setting up for his Radiant Greninja play. If I was able to evolve one of my Rolts and my Curlier to Gardevoir, his plan to use Radiant Greninja would be useless, and I would be in a very favourable spot to win the game. I had Rare Candy and Gardevoir EX in my hand, but after Professor's research, 2 Curlier and Radiant Greninja, I was unable to find the Gardevoir to evolve my Curlier. He used Radiant Greninja to knock out both my Curlier, and despite my best effort to use Cresselia to come back into the game, my fate was sealed the same way as in the first game, not ever having an opportunity to set up a Curlier. I was down 2-1. Taking a loss this early isn't great, but it's recoverable. If you want to advance the second day, you can afford 2 losses and a tie, so as long as I could collect myself, I could do this. Round 4 I was against Lost Zone, but this was a different variant than before. He was playing Kyogre with Aqua Storm, which if used right can do up to 250 damage to 2 bench Pokemon, but the rest of his deck was quite weak, with only 2 energy types and his strongest attacker being Snorlax, which can only do 180 damage. All I had to do was worry about Sableye and Radiant Greninja early and then Kyogre later. I realized this early into the game and immediately started attacking with Gardevoir EX, as he didn't really have a good response to it. He got a fast Sableye to knock out my Curlier, but with a combination of Iono, Cresselia and Collapsed Stadium, I was able to get a 2-prize lead, essentially meaning in almost all situations I had won the game. But he had 1 chance left. Roxanne, knock out Manaphy, then Aqua Storm on the next turn. I did all I could, but I couldn't find the Super Rod to bring back the Manaphy which would save the game. But I found Iono, which would leave him with only 3 cards. Going down to 1 prize, all I could do was pray he didn't find the combo. He found Colress but could only draw until he had 1 card in deck. He needed to hit all 5 energies to win. Out of his 6 cards, 1 was not an energy. 5 out of 6 times I win this game. But he started flipping and he hit all 5 energies. With such an unexpected loss, I had to regroup, and I had to do it fast. That game had taken 30 minutes, so I only had 20 minutes to finish the second game to at least get a tie out of the series. He lost turn to Kyogre on turn 1, so I immediately realized that all I had to do was win this game was attack with Gardevoir EX every turn. He had a very slow start. I was playing as fast as I could, not playing down my level balls or fog crystals wherever possible. And with only 2 prize cards left, time was called on my turn. I had just enough time to win, but I had an issue. Because I've been playing fast, I didn't have a chance to play a lot of my cards. I had no Curly on board, and with both Rare Candy discarded, I had no way to get another Gardevoir EX next turn, after this one went down. I had to think of a solution fast, and unfortunately, I couldn't. He knocked out my Gardevoir EX with Snorlax. What I thought would be a triumphant tie ended in a loss. I was heartbroken. To have a win snatched away from me like that was brutal. I was now 2-2. If I wanted to advance, I would have to win all except one of my remaining rounds, which would have to be a tie. Round 5, I was playing another Gardevoir mirror, but this player was clearly even more defeated than me. I went first and got ahead, and while he tried to stop me with his interesting inclusion, part to the peak, turning off my abilities, I was prepared with Worker in my hand, allowing me to Cresselia and knock out his Curlier. After he wasn't able to find a Gardevoir EX, he conceded. Game 2 he went first, but had a bad hand. He only got one Ralts in play, but my hand wasn't very good either, so I had to play Iono, refreshing both of our hands. But I was far more fortunate than he was, as he passed his turn and conceded after I knocked out his only Ralts. This put me at 3-2, a respectable record, but this was only the start. Round 6 I played against Arceus paired with Goodra V-Star, a matchup I knew I shouldn't have any issues with. In the first game, while I got off to a quick start bossing up my Curlier, I was ready and was able to knock out his Goodra with Shiny Arcana Gardevoir on the second turn. But he had Radiant Alakazam, which was able to move damage from my Mew to my Shiny Arcana Gardevoir to knock it out, giving him the prize lead. With 4 to 3 prize cards remaining, I knew if I simply attacked with Zacian for the next 2 turns to knock out both his Arceus and his Drapion, the game was mine. That's exactly what I did. In game 2 he had an unfortunate start, drawing only Hawlucha and no other Pokemon in his opening hand. Arceus V-Star decks rely on getting Arceus V into play on the first turn, so with no Arceus, it was as if I was playing going first with an advantage. He set up on the next turn, but I set up so well that I was able to boss knock out his Goodra while he was still at 5 prizes. So after a few more attacks with Zacian, I was able to easily win the game. It was nice to have a relatively easy round like this, putting me at 4 wins, 2 losses in the tournament, but the rest of the rounds would not be as easy. In round 7 I was playing against Lugia V-Star, which aims to flood the board with energy using Archeops' Primal Turbo ability. He went first and set up both his Archeops, but I saw a fatal flaw with his board setup. He had benched 3 Snorlax, meaning he didn't have any space for hard-hitting Pokemon. I bossed up his Archeops 2 turns in a row to slow him down and stop him from having any chance at taking big knockouts. My plan was to use Gardevoir EX and Clap Stadium to sponge hits and heal it for the rest of the game, so I did exactly that. I knocked out all 3 of his Snorlax with Gardevoir EX, but the game got difficult. We were tied 2 prizes to 2. In order to win I would have to knock out his Lugia, but I couldn't knock it out off the bench because I had used both boss's orders, so I knocked out his Snorlax again, but he had one possible way to win. I did damage Gardevoir on the bench, so if he had Jet Energy, Weird Ear and Boss, he would win. Fortunately for me, he couldn't find it from his hand that had just been replenished due to gift energy. I won the first game in what felt like a marathon, but it wasn't over yet. We had just about half the time left after this game. We had enough time to finish one game, but if he won this one, it would go to a tie. I had a terrible start, but thought I still had a chance to win. I tried everything, Shiny Arcana to take back my prize deficit, Gardevoir EX to take a hit, nothing worked. And I ended up losing that game, and with very little time on the clock, we agreed to a tie. Now I was at 4 wins, 2 losses and a tie. I had to win my last few rounds. With all I'd invested to be here, there was no other choice. Win or go home. Round 8 had me playing against Gardevoir EX. He had a very unique list, but his unique cards were for other matchups, not this one. I had the slight edge, but this player was clearly more competent than my other Gardevoir opponents. I won the coin flip, and after a good turn 1, I wasn't able to find the rare candy on the second turn, but neither did he, so I was still able to get the first attack, using Cresselia to knock out his Curlier, and playing an Iono to reduce his hand. He drew Gardevoir EX, but not much else. He had to use Zacian with Forest Sealstone to even get an attack off, but this gave me the perfect opportunity to boss it up and knock it out with Shiny Arcana Gardevoir, putting me 2 prizes ahead, and he immediately conceded. In the second game, he went first and had an amazing start, with 3 Curlier on the bench and a Cresselia attack on turn 2. Even though I had the rare candy and Gardevoir EX in hand, if I played this out there would be no time for a third game. I decided I'd have a better chance going first in a deciding game 3. I couldn't find rare candy on the second turn, and he got an early lead, but he had to use Zacian to do it. I used my baby Gardevoir to knock out his Zacian. It was back and forth. I found a way to use my Shiny Arcana to knock out his Gardevoir EX, putting me to just 2 prizes left to his 3. I was ahead, but only by 1 prize. He used Cresselia to finally knock out my Arcana, but I realized something. I was ahead, but I didn't have the boss to knock out his Gardevoir EX. All I could do was Cresselia. If he knocked out my Gardevoir, I'd be knocked out of the tournament. He found Reversal Energy, with 6 energy on his Shiny Arcana, had the boss's orders to knock out my Gardevoir EX. I was crushed. I put in all this effort just to be eliminated on the first day, not even close to how well I wanted to do. I easily won round 9 against a Mew VMAX opponent that couldn't set up, ending the tournament at a disappointing 5-3-1 record. But there's more tournaments to come, and fortunately for me, I'll be able to use what I learned from this tournament in those tournaments. Thanks for watching.